Well, in episode 589 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton. He's Domagoj Kostanjšak, and we have some semi-meaningless football to talk about, with more semi-meaningless football coming up on Thursday. But Domagoj, are you ready to add a little bit of meaning to what we watched yesterday against Real Sociedad and beyond?
Absolutely, Dan. Absolutely. Always ready to give some more thoughts on Barca. As you said, it is a bit of a late time in the season, and some of us have already checked out, myself included. I'm kind of like just waiting for it to all end, and then let's move on to the transfers and let's move on to next season and see what can be done, what can be improved. But yeah, still some things to discuss, so let's dig right into it.
Well, it wasn't that meaningless. I mean, they did move that being Barcelona back into second place, and they now control their own destiny again with 3 games remaining to get that sweet, sweet Spanish Super Cup money. It's Thursday away at Almeria, so we're going to try to make sure this show isn't redundant by Thursday and so useful after Thursday or Friday, depending on when people listen to it. Then home to Rayo next Sunday, and then away to Sevilla the following Saturday to end the season. And so with Almeria, Rayo, and Sevilla, those are 3 I would call winnable games for Barcelona to finish second place. And as much as the Champions League ended the way it did and Liga ended the way it did, into trophy season and all that stuff, it kind of does make you reflect on last season winning that La Liga, and kind of in the time as it was happening, I'm saying, don't take this one for granted, and being like, even next season with Kylian Mbappe and all that garbage, that you are going to say that it won't be expected to win a trophy next season, but we'll see what happens. And the reason I even talk about next season after Real Sociedad, we're going to kind of have big picture ideas, and we're going to sprinkle in parts from yesterday as we go along, because I think even watching yesterday's match, I'm thinking, all right, is this the same team, sans Inigo Martinez likely, but is this basically the same team in the 1 minute, of course, of Ora Romeo that we saw at the end there that we're going to see next season? Because there's I think, a really good chance that all the players that featured yesterday, including Cancelo, are going to be in next season's squad. And likely, I would argue, if not for Balde, and of course, we'll see when Gavi gets back, but you could basically, other than Frankie de Jong, start the same 11 without Inigo Martinez. Now we're down to 9 players. I know my math is not good, but now you're already down to basically having the same starting lineup to start a preseason match or to start next season, and that's basically the same team. So I think I'm going to start this discussion, Domagoj, with a really, really hypothetical question, and I don't want to throw you off here, but I was a little disappointed in how they came out. They came out a little bit flat, that did Barcelona. And then there were times where they tried to take possession. They did win the possession battle. Was it like 53-47? Also very, very close, or 57-43. But it was still pretty close for Barcelona. And it felt like a team, even when the game opened up, that is likely going to have to play the same way that they did this season, right? Like, is there, from a tactical approach, again, a very philosophical question here, can you really change that many things when you have Gundogan's going to be 33, moving on to 34 next season, and Lewandowski is, what is he going to be, 36, 37?
Yeah,
he's turning 37 over the summer. So can you really change that many things on the margins when you have certain players in your squad who are up there in their 30s, and really at this point you can't ask them to change much?
I don't think we'll see a different Barcelona going to next season, regardless of the personnel. I think what people believe is that, okay, you find this mythical number 6 and you put him in this team, and suddenly Barca will control games. Suddenly Barca will be the Barca of old, the romanticized Barca. I don't see that happening because the intent of the coach is so strong. I think Barca play the way they do because Xavi wants them to play this way. He wants them to be direct or vertical, or to identify and exploit space as quickly as possible. I think that is Xavi's idea of how he wants to play football. And now the problem is he has this box, and then that box represents his tactics, and then he's kind of shoehorning the players into that box, and he's like, okay, we're playing this way regardless of the profiles I have at my disposal. And I feel like even if you check a player who's very horizontal, player who is very safe and maybe understands how to slow down the game and when to slow down the game, I don't think a single player can offset the whole intent of the whole team. So I think in that regard, yes, we'll see more of the same stuff from Barcelona. And Gundogan is a great example because he's a player who knows when to slow down. He's the one who's going to show the players, okay, let's stop, let's go back, and then we'll go forward later when we're better prepared, better set up, better structure to go forward. But even then, if you have a player like Gundogan, that doesn't offset the whole team, because Xavi still insists. Well, I don't know if he insists on it, but I feel like he prefers or wants to play this way, and I just don't see that changing. The best case scenario for Barcelona is that they get players who actually fit that system more than the ones that we already do. So if you have an outlet on the left, or maybe a striker who can maybe attack the space as well, maybe that way, or maybe midfielders with legs and lungs, okay, then you can play the way Xavi wants to play and be more successful. Because as things currently stand, you have players who are excellent in one spectrum of football, but then you're using them the other way, and that's why you're not getting optimal results. I still feel like this Barca team, even though it's not complete, we do have great players. We do have players who are able to compete for La Liga, or compete domestically, and even maybe push for some things in Europe. Not win in Europe, but they can still be something there. But as long as they are used the way they are meant to be used, or the proper way, the way that aligns with their profiles, I feel like at this moment, I still see this Barca being underutilized, or maybe suboptimally used by Xavi, because you have certain profiles and they're not being used the way they're meant to be used, because Xavi has an idea of football, a clear idea of football, and he's insisting on it. I think I see this whole verticality and directness thing that so many people mention. I see it as the intent of the coach, not his inability to coach a control-based, slower Barca, if that makes sense, Dan.
Yeah, it does. And I think the player that kind of reflects this to me the best is a player that in theory featured yesterday, but also didn't, in Pedri. Because Pedri yesterday was a net positive. And playing deeper, it was funny because I found the discourse about his match. People seem to argue about the idea of what Pedri is, as opposed to what he was being asked to do yesterday and what he's being asked to do so many times this season. Because as I had mentioned in the 5 headlines, his stats were fine. He completed the 70 minutes without, in the first half at least, he didn't miss a single pass. He was 46 of 46. His positioning was really good. I thought Pedri outplayed both Torrientes for Real Sociedad and Mikel Moreno. And if you're going to win that midfield battle like that through Pedri, then you are giving yourself a leg up. And I thought when Barcelona said they started slow and Real Sociedad had a ton of possession in the first 15 minutes. But then once Barca kind of found the game, and Pedri did his job without too much fanfare. And I find that the difficult thing with Pedri is how good is he now, and what is he capable of, especially going forward, and what is he being asked to do? And because we don't have those answers, I find it so hard when I'm evaluating his season, especially with the injuries too, to evaluate where I judge the final verdict on his year and how much I would trust him with things. Because, I found that yesterday, and shout out to one of the Patreons, Grade 8, who pointed out that I don't know how much forward movement or how much his teammates were expecting some great verticality from Pedri. That's not what he was asked to do. He was asked to control the game and to bring some continuity and control to a game that didn't really have much yesterday, which kind of suited Barcelona, because that meant that Lamine Yamal was getting the ball and picking the ball up in deeper positions and then having more room to run 1v1 at the opposition, as long as Lewandowski and Raphinha were doing their job, which they were, which, again, that'll be the next part of what we talk about. But in the case of Pedri, with Gundogan and Christensen, since that change, when Christensen came in to be the pivot and Gundogan is now the attacking midfielder and the high interior, and that's set in stone. Because I think the worst that Barcelona played this season was with Gundogan in that deepest position. I think that Barcelona really struggled, even when De Jong was in and out of the lineup with those injuries. So having Pedri deeper, that's kind of who he is. And once Gabi comes back, now it gets muddied, because I'm not sure and whether you want to start Pedri or De Jong. It's so funny to me that that's now, I think, the argument, that going into next season, Gundogan is your high interior. Gabi is you're starting him. I mean, he's the other quote unquote high interior, likely on that left side, but you're starting him because you need all the intangibles that he brings to a game. And now, unless you're going to start 4 midfielders, you're talking about a pivot, which De Jong is not, which Pedri is not, right? And so, to your point, Xavi wants to play a certain way, but even the midfield profiles he has doesn't fit that. And I'm now going to be speaking about Pedri in a way that I've said he's untouchable, and I still think he's untouchable. But I'm concerned that, as excited as I was to have Pedri playing under Xavi, I don't know if that union is ever going to get the best out of Pedri, even if he stays healthy. And I don't know with the squad that is Gundogan and Gabi and Pedri and not a pivot that you're going to get the best out of Pedri. And that is concerning to me because it's unfortunate. In a perfect world, you have rotation. You actually need those midfielders because De Jong goes down at times, because Gabi's coming back from an ACL, because Gundogan is going to be 34, because Pedri is not healthy as well. So even if you did bring in a pivot, having that kind of midfield depth would be useful. I mean, good squads have that kind of midfield depth and you don't worry about it. And you say, all right, Pedri only starts 40% of the time. That's fine. But Barcelona financially, also on their wage bill, don't have that luxury. So it's a really tough thing where Barcelona are kind of desperate to say, hey, we need basically 3 midfielders who can start 85% of the time and stay healthy and fit our wage bill, which is, I mean, I talked about it in the last show with Ruri, but that's dreamland. And unfortunately, I think when we talk about players like a Pedri, now we're trying to imagine him in dreamland, but he doesn't give you offensively what you expect from him. And he's had injuries that have kind of stunted his progress. So I don't know. Pedri, I've been talking now for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes about Pedri because Domagoj, he is the guy I think more than any other on this team that keeps me up at night.
That's very true. I mean, we all want Pedri to succeed. We all want Pedri to be who we know he can be. But now, what is Pedri's ceiling and what profile is he going to be once he reaches, if he reaches that ceiling? See, I always, when Gundogan was signed, when he was first signed, there was this discussion, who's going to be the left-sided midfielder? Is it going to be Gundogan or is it going to be Pedri? And that left-sided player was always kind of the more attacking one, the one that saw less of the ball, but was more like near the box and had that more of a attacking threat. And then the right-sided midfielder was more involved in the build-up, had this license to go deeper if needed, but also progress the ball forward. And I argued, okay, Gundogan has to be on the left because he has the attacking instincts, he has that box presence, he has that sense for goal. Pedri, you can't limit Pedri to just a couple of zones. You have to allow Pedri to influence the play across the pitch right away. If he feels like he needs to be deeper, he will go deeper. He will interact with the ball more. So I've always felt, okay, Pedri needs to be where the ball is. Pedri needs to be involved in everything at all times, and I still believe that's true. Now the issue is if you want Pedri to run across the pitch all the time, up and down, up and down, up and down, that's not going to get us anywhere because we know that his fitness currently is what it is. If it doesn't improve, you have to dose Pedri a bit more in a way that he's either going to start games but not finish them, or he's going to come off the bench. And I still feel like that's the way to go for a while now, at least until that point where he's complete again or fit again, fully fit, if that ever happens. But the notion for me stays the same. I think he is more of that deep presence, someone who can control the game for you, someone who can progress the ball for you from the deeper areas, because Pedri is a lot like De Jong in that sense, where he's one of a handful of players who can receive the ball against the pressure in a deep area, beat his mark, and then progress that ball like almost effortlessly, right? If De Jong does that when he turns to his marker, Pedri can do it as well. And I feel like that's where he is best used, especially when you have this possibility of Frenkie leaving this summer. So I think Pedri kind of slots in that role a bit more. I mean, the thing is, Frenkie has legs, Pedri doesn't. And that's a big thing. When you look at Barca pressing or Barca defending deep, you can see Pedri jogging behind his markers sometimes. I mean, he's a great defender. He does his tackling, he does the intercepting. He can do that, but for a very limited amount of time, right? And then he's done. Like he's exhausted. He shouldn't push himself a bit more, because if he does, injuries can happen. While De Jong, he can do that for 90 minutes if needs be. And people will say, okay, he chases the ball, he's ball watching, but he does a lot of leg work, De Jong, that Pedri cannot do. So if you remove De Jong and put Pedri in that role, can he do the leg work? I don't think he can. So you have to pair him up with someone who can actually cover a lot of ground, who can beat the legs of that midfield. Is that Christensen? I don't know. Could be, but at the same time, I'm not sure if that's the ideal long-term solution either. So it's a very tricky situation, but I would say that Pedri is still this high volume, always involved, not limited type of player in that midfield. So, and it would be deeper, I think. It would be deeper, because whenever we've seen Pedri in that number 10 quote-unquote role where he had to impact the final third a bit more, I didn't see enough from him. I didn't see enough to say, okay, he belongs there. I think at this moment, Gundogan is a much better fit, as you said, for the advanced role, because he does have that instinct. He does have that that smell for goals, and the movement he does, which is from his Manchester City days. I think that's where he thrives. So I think having Gundogan higher will get Barca more, and then having Pedri deeper will also get more out of him. Now, the problem is, does being deeper mean he also has to cover more ground and be more defensive and put a lot more work into that? That's the question that needs to be answered, because if that means yes, then yes, he has to have a partner next to him who will compensate for his lack of fitness, so to speak. So that's where I see him just now. But he's still a game breaker for Barca, because he does these things. He creates something out of nothing, just like Lamine does. Pedri does too, because he can find himself in situations where you don't necessarily expect him to do something magical, to do something that's going to flip the switch and flip the game, but he does that. He has that. And out of all of our passers, he's the most consistent one. He will not underhit or overhit a pass. He understands the game. He knows where the play has to go, and he knows that he doesn't have to be so vertical at all times. But the thing is, how do you dose him? How do you ensure that he doesn't overexert himself? That's the big question for Xavi going next season. And as you said, yes, our midfielders, sometimes they don't fit that idea, because early on, Xavi wanted our interiors to be these half space penetrators. They would start high and they would attack the box, attack the space. I remember Gavi being in that role for a long time because he has the legs. But if you put Pedri in such a role, it would just break him. So if you have such players on the pitch, you have to think, how do I best manage them? How do I optimize them without breaking them? And with Pedri, that's now, in this moment, that's the most important thing. And for any coach who's to come in, the most important thing is, because I see Xavi still as a transitional coach, a caretaker, if you will. The most important thing for the coach at Barca now is not to break the goods that we have, because we do have the goods, that some valuable players, youngsters who are capable of doing a lot, but just don't break them. That's the thing for Barca just now.
Yeah, I really like that point about Pedri and the pressing, because this is just the eye test. I don't have the stats to back this up. But the first 2 seasons that Pedri was at Barcelona before the injuries and he got burned out in that second year, his pressing was so advanced to me. I think his rest defense and having Busquets with him, this is also the other variable. It's so hard to know, because Busquets was always in the right position, even if physically he couldn't do what he was being asked to do. And I find that, unfortunately, at that point, Busquets was 32, 33, 34. And at this point, Pedri is still 21. When now I'm actually looking at Pedri, and I think back to yesterday's match, the times that Real Sociedad got through the middle is that Pedri knew where he was supposed to be. He's so smart, especially on the press. He's him and Gabi. I mean, it's natural. There's an instinct there that you still see De Jong on that, and I say that boring term, but rest defense. De Jong isn't always in the right spot, especially when he's the one who's pushed forward. But Pedri is so often in the right spot, and Gabi's always in the right spot. And Pedri this season, as you mentioned, because he doesn't necessarily trust himself, he doesn't trust his legs. Even yesterday, when he was in the right spot, he wasn't necessarily able to physically be where he needed to be. And you mentioned that's why it looks like in transition he's like chasing the opposition or something, where he didn't really do that first or second year. And I do find that as an interesting point, that can Pedri get back to his best? Because defensively, in rest defense and winning the ball back in the opponent's third is one of the skills that I felt that Pedri had. And this season, his impact is a little limited, because I think getting the ball back immediately, winning those tackles, and then immediately playing that right decision or correct ball in transition when you've already won it back in your opponent's third, that is what Pedri really excelled at, and you're having less opportunities to do that. Now, when you say about optimizing players, this is a good transition. It's funny, because I was going to say let's do Lewandowski, but when you optimize, I actually want to do Raphinha, because by the end of the season now, 10 goals, 12 assists, 10 and 10 for the second year, which is kind of what Raphinha is asked to do. And I felt like watching him yesterday, and considering his last month, since basically Xavi said, Raphinha, I don't know if it's because we need you to start on the left wing because I don't trust anybody else, but you're starting on the left wing. If you want to get starts, here's where you are. Lamine Yamal is our best winger on the right wing. This is happening. So accept it, embrace it, or you're going to be on the bench, and I'm going to have to throw out Domagoj's favorite player, João Felix, and of course, but so Raphinha, I think Raphinha, especially yesterday, you saw And I think the argument can be made that Domagoj, I don't make a lot of hot takes, so it's a dangerous territory for me. Has Raphinha been optimized in Xavi's system more than any other player? Has he gotten more out of Raphinha than anybody else? Because Raphinha is playing, even when he showed up 2 years last season, and you saw him on the left wing occasionally, and I went, good God, get that guy off the left wing. There's no way this player can be useful in any way on the left wing. He can only play on the right side. But now, 3-4 months after the fact that he really was kind of pushed into making that transition this season, his ability to understand, especially yesterday without Zubamendi and Torrientes and Moreno, as I said on the 5 headlines, was pushing forward a bit more. So because they practice with De Jong so much, I think the players, especially those attackers, instinctively understand, hey, if that guy's playing like De Jong, that means that there is space to be found underneath where he's supposed to be, and let me try to exploit that space. And Torrientes was just a bit slow to understanding when he was supposed to be dropping into basically a 5 at the back, or he was supposed to be pushing forward as Real Sociedad had possession. And I don't think Torrientes, who's also kind of a natural 8, understood where he was supposed to be, because neither were really replacing Zubamendi, which means if no one is naturally replacing a sole pivot, then nobody's replacing him at all. And I think Raphinha did a really good job yesterday dropping into that middle space. That's why he got on the ball so often. That's why he got so many shots, because he exploited the space that not every team leads, but Real Sociedad were. And I thought in the last few weeks, when he was also supposed to stretch and be wide and be vertical and run in behind, he was doing that job based on the opponent. So Raphinha's, I think, ability to adapt to where the opponent was leaving their spaces and whether or not his teammates kind of sent the ball to him in those spots was indicative of whether or not he was succeeding. So I've actually been really impressed with him in the last 2 months, where I went from the first half of the season to saying, yeah, I think it's going to be easy for Barcelona to say this is a play we want to part with. And you could argue that I would say they were going to have to, put a good PR campaign for kind of sending Raphinha out. But now I get to the end of the season and I say, actually, Raphinha can be useful on the left wing. Of course, Nico Williams would solve problems, or some other left winger, of course, great. But I don't think Barcelona can be able to do that. And when push comes to shove next season, because of the amortization and his contract, you've got to sell him for 70 million to be able to recoup something. So I would say that Raphinha, I'm almost okay with living with the sunk cost fallacy that you can't get 70 million for him. So if you can only get 50 million for him or 40 million for him, he's actually a more useful player than what he would be going for on the transfer window at this point. So maybe you keep Raphinha because, yeah, it'd be great if he gave you 16 and 12 instead. And if your second or third winger is expected to do that, but I would argue that 10 and 12 this season almost exceeds or is equal to his expected production, which is what you need from your forwards. But I actually think the intangibles he brings defensively and understanding that space and understanding what the opponent is giving you has almost outsourced that. So that's my little spiel on praising Raphinha. I think Raphinha actually had a net positive of the season, and I can't say that of everybody. And I think now I go up and down the squad and say, did that player exceed my expectations for this season, or did they not? And maybe my expectations for Raphinha were rather low, but I do feel like I can say at the end of the season that he's exceeded that because he learned how to play out of position and make himself useful when he was completely replaced by a 16-year-old. So my hat is off to Raphinha by the end of this year.
Yeah, no, it's rough because when you put it that way, okay, he's been replaced by a 16-year-old, but Lamine is just so special that it's a weird, the context there is so weird. But yeah, I mean, I would agree. Currently, Raphinha's biggest problem is that he is marketable. He's someone the Barca can sell. I mean, yeah, as you said, maybe if it's just 40 or 50 million, maybe it's not worth it. But at the same time, Barca need to sell someone and they need to sell an arm and a leg to do anything in the summer transfer window. So Raphinha is still, in my mind, is still likely. I mean, not likely to leave, but if someone's to leave and if it's to be a bigger quote unquote transfer, I think Raphinha might be on that list. But yes, back to your point, he's not flashy. He's not always aesthetically pleasing and whatnot. He doesn't do a lot of fancy moves, but he gets the job done. I think that's his thing. The simplicity of his actions is a positive of his profile in a way, and as long as he's used in the way he's meant to be used, he will give you output. So yeah, I think it's all about that optimization. And the problem is apparent when you don't optimize Raphinha, that's where you get this very frustrating winger. When you ask him to be more than he is, And that has been a problem with not just Raphinha, but with some other players as well. Because I don't really see Raphinha as this wide fixer type of winger, because he doesn't have those mechanics in his profile. Elite wide wingers, in my mind, they're usually either great space eaters or either great space managers. And I don't see Raphinha doing either of those things exceptionally well. I mean, he can do it. He can attack space and he times his movement perfectly sometimes, but not over acres of space, right? Not over acres of pitch. So he's not a really big space eater in that sense. At the same time, he doesn't have the fluency and variety of touches when approaching a 1-versus-1 to fix the defender and then beat them either side. He doesn't have that. So if you play him in a system where he gets the isolations in wide spaces and open spaces, you're probably using him wrong, because he's not that kind of player. So that begs the question, what kind of player is Raphinha? Well, on the right side, what we saw, he is a minimum width type of player who lives in the half space, inverts close to the box, and then he uses that ball striking to kind of to great effect, right? On the left, it's more of the same, I would say. He's more of a creator then, because he's more of the left foot that has to cross in. But again, his strengths remain largely the same, and ball striking is the main aspect of that. I feel like he's a tidy, simple player who will do the maximum of his profile as long as he's playing within the limits of that profile. In a sense, if you do that, he will get you something. He will always give you something, right? He's someone who may rely on volume as well, because he keeps trying and doing something until it sticks, right? So sometimes it feels like he's banging his head against the wall, but he's just a volume type of player who will make a lot of mistakes, who will try again, but then he will succeed in the end. I think the numbers do support that. As you said, his output has been really good. So I can see value in him, right? I can see value in Raphinha, because, as you said, it's not all in the attacking output. It's also a bit in the defensive part and how he understands when and what to do. And some of these moves that he makes, like the runs behind the defense, especially when he times them well, it's undefendable. And I feel like that's something that's worth keeping, because Barca don't have many inevitable or undefendable moves in the repertoire, and Raphinha definitely gives you at least a little bit of that. Now, if Raphinha was to be sold to fund Nico Williams, for example, I think Barca will still take that trade.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think
So
so in that scenario, I think if that helps, he will still get offloaded. And I feel like, it makes sense at the end of the day, because they have Lamine there, and now having Nico on the other side, it would change things drastically, at least on paper. So I feel like he still may be that sacrificial lamb, someone who will have to get sacrificed to get Barca to the next level, so to speak. But there is no denying that he's been a good servant to the club, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I agree with that. And now let's transition to the center forward spot, because I think we've been largely positive-ish throughout the first two discussions. So let's kind of end this by talking about the center forwards, because we got to talk about Lewandowski, and then we'll wrap up with Vitor Roque. So Lewandowski, it's so funny, because the better he plays, the worse I wind up feeling after the match. And I think the worse he winds up feeling after the match too, especially when he doesn't score the goals. So Xavi's comments, let's start with the end and work our way backwards. Xavi's comments after this game: Lewandowski's change was for a tactical issue to be able to press high again, and because this week there are 3 games. We need a little more strength. We need a little more legs. We have made a great effort, and Robert has made a very good job. I understand Lewandowski's anger. I didn't like being changed either. Now, center forwards, they hate being taken off the field. They want to play the 90 every time. They think that, hey, you pay me to score goals. If I don't score goals, I get booed. And this season, Lewandowski has scored 24 goals. Last season, he scored 33. So he has been booed a little bit, obviously, because he scored a number that is lower than what is expected of a Robert Lewandowski. I think what he expects of himself, and what the fans also expect of him based on what he's being paid, which is the second highest wages in the squad next to De Jong, if those poor reports are to believe. And next season, that number is going up. So here's the problem here. Lewandowski put in a really good shift yesterday. I really liked his effort. He was pressing well for so much of it in the first half. And most importantly, over the last month, as his form has, I'm going to use air quotes here. It's probably the improper use of air quotes, but it's rebounded, I want to say. Like, even if the goal scoring isn't there, his effort and work has been better because he's winning aerial duels. But Lewandowski is now at a point where his best even on the hat trick assist or the MLS assist, wouldn't even call it, the hockey assist, on the goals of Lamine Yamal, beautiful. So much of it deserved to Lewandowski. He moves into the midfield, basically the halfway line. Lenormand comes a step with him and overplays it. Lewandowski knows he's going to get clobbered by Lenormand, and instead of just kind of waiting to take the contact, he plays the ball. And yeah, it's a bit fortunate. I think it goes through the legs of the defender, but he plays that ball on to Gundogan, who then waits patiently, perfectly, gives it over to Lamine Yamal, who takes a breath and passes it into the goal. So good goal there from Barcelona. That so much was created by Lewandowski, who yesterday, again, 5 of 8 of the duels won, most of those coming with his back to goal. Because at this point now in his career, with 24 goals, that is not equal to the number of million euros he's going to make next season. And with a striker, you would love it if you paid a striker, even if it costs you €1 million on the season for every goal. It's basically what Messi made in his last 3-4 seasons, right? And that's kind of what, with Lewandowski and a name like that, you're paying for. Real Madrid was doing the same thing with Benzema, but unlike Lewandowski, Benzema, they parted in a certain way. And so Lewandowski getting frustrated by coming off the field yesterday, why that's so concerning for now and even for next season is that he put in a really great shift. And to Xavi's point, he doesn't have the legs to be able to press the way that he was being asked to and still continue to do the job that he was being asked to do, and did well yesterday for 90 minutes. And that game, with the space that, as I mentioned, Real Sociedad were leaving in the middle of the field, that was calling out for Ferran Torres, which is why Ferran Torres got a shot opportunity within a minute of being on the field, which is almost justification and vindication for Xavi to make that substitution. So I think it's, and this happens with strikers all the time, it's frustrating to me that Lewandowski's pay is being increased the way it is, which is, again, something that Barcelona are going to have to eat, which is fine if he's scoring 25 to 30 goals next season, which you cannot guarantee. But let's say hypothetically, Lewandowski is still able to play with his back to goal, score the goals that he scores, and scores 25 to 30 next season, which with 3 matches remaining, he might score 25 this year. I don't think he's going to get to 30 with only 24 right now, but he could get to 25, which, again, is that good enough? Numerically, it depends also on the matches he scores those in. Listen, if he only scores his goals in knockout Champions League matches next year, then, or El Clasicos, then, fine, those goals matter for more. But for Lewandowski, if he doesn't understand who he is going to be next season and he's mad about that substitution, I don't want to read too much into it, but his unwillingness to potentially accept who he is now, that is going to hurt you just as much as his pay increase. Because now you're paying a guy who, not say is going to be unsettled, but doesn't fully understand who he is. And at 37 next season, that's going to be a problem. And that's going to continue to be a problem. And, I feel like Lewandowski, with his pay increase, he's not going anywhere. He told you, I'm sticking around because I believe this is who I am. And, I think the effort yesterday is interesting because it also showed a player that, for as mentally tough as he is, he doesn't want to get booed. He doesn't want to go back into the Camp Nou in November and December or whenever they go, January, February, whatever it winds up being with construction. When they go back to that stadium, even on 40 to 50, 60,000 people capacity, Lewandowski doesn't want to get booed. And if he doesn't score goals next season, he's going to get booed. And if he doesn't score goals, if he doesn't give the effort that he gave yesterday that got him a standing ovation when he left the field, then he's going to get booed. So I'm concerned about Lewandowski, not so much what he did this season, because that was concerning with itself. But if he doesn't understand who he is, and Xavi, and I don't think any manager is going to have the power to kind of put him in his place. And then you can even tie this in if you want, because our last segment is Vitor Roque. This seems like an abject disaster that you're going to pay Lewandowski $30 million plus to potentially score 20 goals for you next season at the age of 37 and be mad about getting substituted when he can't press the way that Xavi's going to ask him to. Meanwhile, yes, I know you haven't spent $1 for or euro for Vitor Roque yet. If you find a way to sell him for 40 million euros or 50 million euros, you actually make money on that sale because his incentives and all that was 35 million as the what's the financial word where it was 35 million set with the extra 30 million of incentives, which obviously he's not going to hit a single one of those this season and potentially next season if you sell him. So if you sell him for 45 or 40 to Inter Milan, that was a name that popped up today, then yeah, you're actually making money on Vitor Roque by bringing him to Europe, destroying his career, then shipping him off to Italy. Great job, Barcelona. You made a little money, but you actually have to sell him for 40 million to make any money on that at all, because you haven't. I think you only have to pay 5 million up front now to have brought him over. But the fact that Barcelona are so willing, and we'll say Xavi's almost ready to kick Vitor Roque to the curb right now at the age of 19 and kind of double down on the 37-year-old striker for next season and say, hey, we need a left winger and a pivot. I don't know, Domagoj. That seems like alarm bells to me. It seems like a major problem. I've worked myself now into a tizzy.
Yeah, I'm not even sure where to pick up, but yeah, I feel like 25 goals a season in isolation seems nice. It sounds good, but at the same time, you have to understand. Okay, so is that the only goals we're getting? How much are we getting from the other players? How, are we scoring from set pieces? Are we scoring from penalties? Are we scoring from? Do we have wingers who score goals? Do we have midfielders who score goals? And I don't think we do, right? We at this moment we don't really have that much. In terms of firepower, apart from Lewandowski. Yes, okay, Raphinha scores 10 goals, Felix scores 10 goals. But when you add all that together, is it enough, right? And at this point, based on this season alone, it's not enough, right? So we need more than that. And can we expect Lewandowski to actually up his number of goals going into next season? I doubt that. I don't think, unless unless the collective as a whole, unless our team is so much better than it is just now, then maybe in a better environment with better service, where Lewandowski is actually asked to just be the goal scorer and not much more than that. But it also comes that also means that he'll have to accept that he is just a poacher in the box, which he doesn't want to accept. As the same way that he doesn't want to accept that he needs to get subbed off, he still thinks that he can drop deep and play make and be this link-up Harry Kane kind of type of striker, which he is. Sometimes he can do that, but most of the times he hogs the ball, loses the ball, gets a foul at best, and that's it. That's what he does when he drops deep. And for me, it's not really good enough, right? So it's a big problem, as you say. This is something that Barca will have to resolve sooner rather than later, because at this very moment, okay, we feel like, okay, we have Ferran Torres, we have Lewandowski, and we thought we had Roque, so we were like, okay, we're fine with center forwards, but turns out, okay, we're just not. We're not fine. And Barca will have to look at this and actually reevaluate. I mean, interestingly enough, despite all of his struggles, and there have been quite a few of those moments where Lewandowski kind of really looked his age, and even worse than that, I still think that 2024 was decent. Somehow it was good. It's just that when he looks good, but when he looks bad, he looks really bad. And that comes with the territory, I guess, because we're still dealing with a player who is far past his prime and is not getting any younger. So these things are bound to happen, but the problem is they're bound to happen more often than not as we go forward. As he hits 37 and 38, hopefully he's not here when he's 38, but still. The problem is Lewandowski in his prime was this powerful number 9 who wasn't really an outlet, but he could be a multifaceted kind of threat because his instincts were so good. He's one of those players who can manufacture shooting angles from nothing, basically, and that was his strength, that was his thing. And still, he can do that at a certain level, but not consistently so, right? Now, this Barca team needs a multifaceted attacking threat from that number 9 position, but one that is non-game state dependent, if that makes sense. So what I mean by this is that it needs to be a striker who can attack space when Barca want to be extremely quick and vertical and direct, but also a striker who is happy to unlock a deep block through his movement when you're actually sustaining pressure in the final third, right? So these profiles are valuable, but they're actually not that rare. I think there are strikers like that in the market. But whatever Barca do, they will need a striker who with legs as well, as you said, because as of right now, this lack of mobility in the central areas, but also the lack of the pressing ability is hurting us a lot, because Xavi wants to press. He wants his team to create chances through pressing. And if you have a Lewandowski who just can't do it enough, that's a problem. It's the same with Pedri. Pedri and Lewandowski can do it. They can both do that part of the job, just not over 90 minutes, right? You have to dose them properly in that sense. And I know people will have their opinions on this and they will frown and they will say, but I feel like a Darwin Núñez, for example, or a Benjamin Šeško, those are the type of profiles that will kind of fit what Xavi wants these players to be, because they have transferable profiles. They have profiles who are multifaceted in the way they attack. So I feel like that's the way for Barca to go. And if they can get someone like Šeško, for example, who's on a budget striker who fits the profile, then yes, I mean, they should obviously do it, because Lewandowski, I just don't see him exceeding his numbers from this season, and he has to, because as you said, he would just cost so much that he has to give you much, much more than he's currently giving you, and that's just unlikely.
Yeah, like again, if he made 12 million next season, and you can almost guarantee 20 goals, I guess he was fighting for the Pichichi trophy. So it's this dissonance between Lewandowski and his production, because I mean, how many goal scorers can you guarantee we're going to get you 24 this season up front? Again, fighting for the Pichichi. So it's so hard to say that he's a player who's both impossible to replace, but also you would desperately want to replace him, because again, yeah, he's going to be 37 and making 30 million. And it throws off the entire balance of your team. I mean, you can't do anything else. So it's tough decisions that Barcelona put themselves. And I think it's frustrating, because I'm not going to criticize Laporta too much on this point, but it's like his mandate that he has made a lot of risks and gambles. And I've talked about this, not with Rory on the last show, but 2 shows ago, that is that cycle where he's taken risks. And I think with this trophy-less season is the first real look in the mirror to say some of these risks have already not paid off. Some of them paid off last season by winning La Liga, right? And what was the price of that Liga trophy? We're kind of going to see that this year. And now for the next 2 or 3 seasons, with, again, Real Madrid feeling like squad level wise, they're going to go strength to strength. And if Barcelona do fall behind, right, that is the referendum. And it's so hard with presidents, because you can't really say what they are until after the fact. Because no, on paper, Barcelona, they're going to win the treble next year. Hell no, based on the squad that you're looking at. But it's also, that's why you play the games. That's why football is football. Because what if Lamine Yamal is a superstar? What if Cubarsí is a superstar? Because I guess we don't really have. I mean, I've been talking about Vitor Roque now for a week and a half. I don't have anything more to add other than even with Deco saying, well, I don't know, we don't know yet, and all that stuff. But it really does seem like Inter Milan's either going to buy him on a permanent transfer, and that's what his agent, Andre Curry, is going to be fighting for. But more likely, it seems like the club and the camp are going to just agree on a loan, and he's going to be gone. But again, if he goes on loan, is he ever going to come back? I mean, the rumors are that Ansu Fati, who believes that he can come back, even with Mendes being his agent, he won't be coming back. And yeah, so it's a whole thing. And then João Felix who's his agent? Oh, it's Mendes, who is, and then they're working on Guy Fernandez and his professional contract now and looking for a renewal for him. And who is his agent? Oh, it's Jorge Mendes. And Jorge Mendes is a shadow. I think that Pedri kept me up at night, but I think Jorge Mendes keeps me up at night as well, as far as that. So I'm going to actually leave you with a positive topic that I know I started every topic here and went on my rant, so I'm not going to rant here. I'm going to say that Lamine Yamal and Cubarsí, they were awesome yesterday. And what I liked most about Cubarsí yesterday is that Barcelona played a high line, and it was high risk, high reward, and they wound up succeeding without Araujo playing a high line. And no offense to Inigo Martinez, he got it right the one time he had to, and Becker was offside. And Inigo Martinez did a really good job of making sure he was in his own half of the field so that it wasn't illegal, because you have to be in your own half or else that ball coming over, it won't be offside. So he did a really good job the one time that Inigo Martinez had to be the reactive center back, we'll call it. But I thought Cubarsí dealing with Becker and his speed, one time he got beat, and even then Becker wound up being wide, so he pushed him wide enough on the angle. So I thought Cubarsí was excellent yesterday. Ter Stegen was good enough when he had to be as well. And if you're 2 teenagers, and I know there are other teenagers, but if your 2 marquee teenagers in Lamine Yamal and Cubarsí are that good on just an average day against Real Sociedad, they give you a chance. And Lamine Yamal and Cubarsí gave Barcelona a chance yesterday, because if Lamine Yamal is not as good as he was in 1v1 situations, and if Cubarsí is not as good in a high line against Becker as he was yesterday, again, because he didn't have Araujo to clean up messes yesterday. So I thought Cubarsí was up to the challenge, playing in a different way, and he has been in all the different ways, with a high line, in, we'll say, a medium block, having to be more on the ball and break lines with his passing, or just, again, getting in the box and mixing it up. Cubarsí he has checked every box this year. I'm so excited about his future. His focus is excellent. He was 90 minutes focused yesterday, in a way that other players just aren't on the back line. I mean, Cancelo, you could barely get him to focus for like 8 or 9 minutes at a time. So yesterday, I thought Cancelo was poor. I thought his focus was just off the whole day. But Cubarsí, that focus and that brain is wonderful. So I was really excited, and they were awesome yesterday. And so as much as I talk about next year and go, no, boo boo, boo, it's just like, well, actually, I don't actually, unless Barcelona are going to burn them out, which they're going to do, we don't know how much they're going to give the team. But we know that they're going to give them at least what they got this year. And if Lamine and Cubarsí are going to get better next year, I don't know. I don't know Barca's ceiling, because I don't know their ceiling, which is actually a good problem to have.
It is. I mean, we always we like to dream, right? And we also kind of expect Barca to do, or we want them to do real well, and we support Barca, obviously. And that's why I feel like we're sometimes very harsh with these expectations. We're like, okay, we like to criticize the club because we want them to do well, we want them to do the right things and do and just succeed and win trophies and all that. But I feel like the squad as it is right now and this season, we should not have been as bad as we have been, right? So there's not a single team in La Liga, Madrid included, who deserve to be like a I don't know, a dominant force, because I just don't see anyone running away with the league with the quality of football they've shown throughout the season. So I feel like we had everything to kind of compete with Real Madrid and make more of an effort to actually challenge for the title and maybe even win the title. But it is what it is. But yes, as you said, Cubarsí and Lamine are definitely the two brightest stars that we have currently. And if Barca can fly as high as they can fly, that will be amazing. But we'll see. The thing is just dosing them and making sure that they don't break. As I said, the next season is all about keeping the all of our goods undamaged and keeping them fit and healthy and making sure that they are thriving in the environment. And that's it. And that's all you have to do. And then once hopefully we get someone else, once Xavi leaves, I still support Xavi. I want to say this. I support everything he does. I want him to succeed. But at this point, it's unlikely that he's going to drastically change this Barca. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it happens, but I just don't see at this point. So if we do kind of hope that an elite coach is going to come around in 2 years' time and then take over this team, then Xavi's job would be to kind of ensure that he gets, that elite coach gets the best possible team, the healthiest possible team, that's not burned out, that's not broken, that's not scrapping for games and stuff like that. So I feel like if we can get to that stage, in that shape, that will be a win for us. But at the same time, as I said, we have a squad that can actually compete domestically. I feel like I fully believe that we have a squad that can compete domestically. We don't have, like, player for player, we won't have a better squad than Real Madrid, but we don't have to have every position upgraded or every position better than Real Madrid. We can still compete domestically, and I feel like that's what we should do. But obviously with maybe those expectations, because that's where progress actually starts. So we have to accept where you are and what you are in this moment, and what needs to happen for you to actually reach the next level. It's the same thing in life, the same thing in football. That's the first step, and then you kind of build from there, and you kind of go forward and improve. But I fully believe that we can be someone in La Liga still, despite all the struggles, despite all our tactical problems and injury problems and all that. Just this season was obviously not as good, but it should have been better, I still feel. And maybe next year, maybe next year we can actually do something more. I don't expect us to win anything next year, and I feel like that's good, just because go into next season with low expectations and just make sure that your youngsters are healthy and fit and improving, and that's it. I feel like that's where we are currently, and if we can go into next season with that mindset, then there's nowhere to go but up, and that's kind of what we want to do.
Yeah, and I'll be talking about transfers for the next few weeks, and I think even you mentioned dreams, and I think for me, unfortunately, I have a lot of night terrors and nightmares. Like the way I do this, I have like that terrible sleep apnea, so I have like a lot of what's it called? It's not sleep paralysis, but that thing where like I have lucid dreaming. So like, but I have a lot of nightmares, and yeah, I don't think covering Barcelona has helped me over the last few seasons.
Wait, do you control your dreams? It's like you can actually when you're dreaming. Is that it?
Well, I remember a lot of my dreams.
I remember it. Okay, all right. Yeah.
So I always see Bartomeu coming out of my closet.
Bartomeu under your bed. Okay.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
Dreaming and what could be a nightmare of a summer. It is interesting because even last season with Inigo Martinez coming in and the Vitor Roque purchase happening and all those things, there is a world that some things happen around the edges that work out really well. Like if the Guido Rodriguez transfer works out really well, I don't think Nico Williams on the way. I don't think Zubamendi. I think that's a dream that I'm talking about. But listen, again, if Guido Rodriguez is better than Ora Romeu was this season, or is just as good as Christensen has been this year, because that's the expectation. He's not the pivot, and I think Zubamendi is a dream, and that's not happening. But if Guido Rodriguez is what you needed Ora Romeu to be this season, that's a good thing for Barcelona, especially competing in the Liga more so than competing in the Champions League. And then with the Nico Williams point, if you're able to say, all right, well, the next season, if he wants to, he's 21, wants to continue to play with his brother at Athletic Club, it does feel like based on a number of different factors, like Nico Williams may eventually be a Barcelona shirt, but it might not be this coming season, and that's fine. But if you're able to bring a Xavi Simons on loan, which doesn't seem that absurd, like if he fights to be on loan and it costs the same amount that they paid for João Felix this season on loan, Xavi Simons is a really good player who could give you a lot and add versatility. So there is this worst case scenario even where you bring in just Guido Rodriguez and Xavi Simons on a loan and a free transfer, which are possible, especially with FFP. If you're going to not pay FFP for Vitor Roque and you're going to ship out one or two other players, Inigo Martinez around the edges, because you can make up for moving Christensen back to center back because Guido Rodriguez, right? So you're moving pieces around, and there's a circumstance where I say, all right, it's not that hard to imagine that the transfer window, you just added 2 or 3 pieces, and the squad is better than it was this season. But those are things that we'll discuss over the next coming weeks. That's a little taste of what I've got kind of cooking on my mind. But before that, Thursday is Almeria, and I'm also going to be, at least it's scheduled, so I don't want to make too many promises, but I'll be on your podcast, so make sure you follow him. That being Domagoj, you follow me everywhere, Hilton D13 on X if it still exists, and the Barcelona podcast as well, everywhere on Twitter, Instagram. And then thanks to the Patreon as well for continuing to support, even in, as I say, these dire times when the matches don't really matter as much. Close Facebook group, Discord, that's the community. Good rating on the apps, subscribing to YouTube, the biggest and easiest, cheapest ways to help the show. Most importantly, though, thanks so much for listening. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Before Barca.